Well, I think first organizations need to decide if they need consultants or not. This might not be in my best interest saying what I'm going to say. The first thought should be, can we do this in-house? I mean, it's going to save money. It's going to, it's going to definitely allow their teams to evolve better. But sometimes they don't have the necessary skills to do something. And sometimes it's not required for them to have that skill. An outside consultant might have done something 10, 20 times, like move a data center. They might only move data centers once in the entire decade. So there's a good example of, okay, now it is viable and it is worth my while bringing in a subject matter expert that's got the experience and done it before.
Welcome to the Digital Healthcare Experience, brought to you by Taylor Healthcare. Subscribe now and stay on the forefront of the digital healthcare revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Digital Healthcare Experience podcast presented by Taylor Healthcare. I'm your host, Chris Civit-Therese, and today I'm joined by Kevin Torf, founder and managing partner of IT consulting firm T2 Tech Group. With over 40 years of experience, Kevin has successfully spearheaded multi-million-dollar IT projects in healthcare, telecommunications, and finance. He specializes in healthcare data management, working with clients such as Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, Sharp Healthcare, NYU Langone Health, Mount Sinai Health System, and Stanford Healthcare, among many others. His book, Getting the Job Done, provides a blueprint for how large-scale tech initiatives can be executed through more effective and flexible project management. Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Chris, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it too. And today's conversation is going to be centered around your experience with helping organizations implement large-scale projects successfully. And I'd love to start by asking you to give our listeners a little bit of background on your work and specifically what you're doing today at T2 Tech Group.
I was very fortunate as a kid growing up with a father that taught me electronics and programming at an early age in my teens, and just loved the technology industry as I went through my earlier parts of my career. Came to the United States some 32 years ago and embarked on different technology adventures. About 15 years ago, I got a bite working for a large healthcare system, and I really just embraced it. It's a fascinating industry. It's got its challenges, and I started focusing more on it. And today, that's primarily what I do today personally, and as a company, we focus on healthcare and helping large providers execute and deliver on their IT initiatives.
That's fantastic. And I know you've worked a lot with CIOs, both in healthcare and also outside of healthcare. And you touched on it, healthcare has its own challenges and all that. I wonder, from your perspective, given your pretty vast experience, what makes healthcare such a unique environment for project execution compared to some of the other industries you're familiar with?
I do believe, and I'm sure there are other industries that might have a lot of applications, but I think healthcare is definitely going to be in the very, very top percentile of just the diversity of the number of applications that make up one provider system. As you probably know, they could total nearly 300-400, and that's excluding the EHR or EMR, which is only one of them. And because of the various vendors that have provided those applications over the decade to a lot of these healthcare systems, they aged. Some of them are newer technologies, some are older technologies, and yet they all got to work together in the same ecosystem in order for these healthcare providers to operate. That's a lot of integration. That's a lot of management of very disparate type applications and platforms. And it's got to be, and they got to be able to sustain and be operated 24/7. And to maintain them is usually a challenge without doing it in a disruptive manner. And those are characteristics you don't get in many other industries. And that makes healthcare unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, you mentioned it, that we could have hundreds of systems in any particular healthcare systems ecosystem. Some of these projects are just absolutely just behemoths in terms of the undertaking that it requires to get them going and then also to sustain them. One of the concepts that I know you talk about is the balance between precision and speed. And I can think of no better sort of use case than healthcare to get into that balance. So, can you give us a little bit on that? What's your perspective on that balancing of speed and precision in healthcare projects?
All of these projects have an implication and they can cause significant disruption to any healthcare organization. And disruption is for the purpose of the way I'm answering the question is when physicians or caregivers, are unable to do their job using the digital resources that are being provided to them, they got to go into some manual type mode and operation, which is very cumbersome. It's error prone, and it's time consuming. It's not effective. It's not productive. So the goal is to always avoid that wherever possible. To do that, it means any time you modifying, changing, or introducing something new to that environment, you got to validate that it's going to be done in an effective way. And that's costly. It takes time. It takes money to test and validate and test and validate. So if you can't do it indefinitely, and we all want to be perfect, but we can't afford to be, unfortunately. So the reality of it is we got to find compromise, and we got to find a way where we minimize that risk, or we accept the risk and we just prepare for the risk, and we prepare how to manage the risk when some of these initiatives don't work out quite as well as we had intended. And that's a lot of preparation and a lot of planning, but that is definitely the compromise to trying to just keep making this perfect, which will mean we'll never really ever get anything done, unfortunately.
It's an interesting concept about sort of managing the risks associated with some of the known and unknown, challenges that might arise. In your experience, are you trying to sort of, I'll say, forecast those risks, and then from a management perspective, kind of be aware of them over time, or are those risks that really kind of pop up throughout the life cycle of a project that you kind of have to react to? Maybe a combination of both. What's your perspective on that?
Yes, no, it is combinations, and the risks are there's multiple different areas of risk. One risk is the technology doesn't work. That one's an easy one actually, because you hopefully have a backup plan and you just reverse everything you did.
Right.
Because of the integration of many of these technologies, sometimes that backup plan isn't as simple as you would like it to be. So, once you engaged, and then it's a matter of, oh, I have to resolve the problem. So having
Right.
those resources available and ready to make those technical changes, anticipating what the implication might be to those caregivers, and having them ready to be able to conduct their business in a different capacity. So there's aspects of that. And then, the last item, which is probably one of the bigger challenges that I think people neglect, is everything works, technology goes into play, everything's right, but the physicians, the nurses, and the caregivers don't know how to actually use the tool. And it's different. And now this was different from the way they did it yesterday. So are they prepared for that? Are they ready for that? But these are problems you can solve. Building out command centers where these types of issues can be addressed in a central manner, having people out there on the floor evangelizing and promoting a lot of these activities. So yes, the risks can be compartmentalized, and there are ways to mitigate each one of them.
That's great. And I'd love to talk a little bit now about your book, Getting the Job Done. What I really enjoyed about the book, many things, but one of the things was the framework that you put out there, the projects framework, projects as an acronym. So I'm curious if you can break that down for us and explain how that relates to ensuring successful projects, especially at scale.
A lot of the work that we do today is all about execution and finding the best ways to as per the title of the book, Getting the Job Done. And with doing that, we've worked with different methodologies over the last several decades where, we've had more structured forms related to how PMP is implemented through the PMI institution. Agile started taking its own life form in the software development era when the onset of Microsoft and a lot of these, commercially based applications that we all use today. And what personally I found was that there's little bits and pieces of each one of these methodologies, including lean, and that you can put together to really build a framework to allow you to execute effectively with the checks and balances that you need for governance in the more formal way, but also having the agility to be able to adapt and do things effectively and to respond to some of the risks and some of the problems that we just spoke about in how you prepare a team to be able to be ready in order to be able to execute and deliver on those changes. So in finding all of that and coming together, we've developed a lot of tips over time to help us internally practice our own methods and theories. And when I started thinking about writing the book, it was, well, really, what are we doing at the end of the day? We're executing on projects. And that led to the word projects, which wasn't planned. And then I thought, well, maybe we just break up the word projects into different acronyms and treat them as letters. And, P started, let's plan, and so forth and so on. Each letter in the word became, a subject matter that we could evolve and then, build tips around and give advice to.
And I know also in your book, you have some really great stories. I'm hoping you can share one or two of those stories that might come to mind about where an organization executed on a large scale project effectively using some of the principles and the approaches that you've outlined in your book and in your practice.
Well, as I mentioned, each letter of that word has its own meaning. And, if you look at, let's start with teamwork, projects, the T in teamwork, that can be the most productive and effective if done well. And, some of the projects we've embarked on require, to use one of the examples when we had to migrate a data center for one of our clients, it involved both infrastructure and the application team. These are two separate teams within an organization. In many cases, they don't quite work as effectively together as possible. But to execute on a project of that magnitude, the two teams needed to be very well aligned. And, there are different approaches and different ways that could have been done. But using an agile method where we broke these teams into smaller teams per each application. So we had a few people from infrastructure, a few people from application, some from the business side, the stakeholders, that were responsible for those applications. And we really got them to be more collaborative with each other and engage with each other. And if you go through the book, you talk about empowering the team, enabling the team to, be able to work together more effectively, to not force timelines on the team and allow the team to determine what their capacity is and what their capabilities are. You can bring a significant amount of productivity to a process. And, I think what we were able to accomplish in that initiative is we moved some, I think 300 plus applications to a data center. There were maybe over 400 people involved in it at different times throughout the engagement. Each application was a project in itself, and we were running maybe 6 or 8 of them at one time. And I think, the net result was we took a 4-year project and we did it in about 2 years, a year and a half.
It's really impressive. And what also comes to mind, and I'd love your perspective on this, what role does effective leadership play in the success of the actual execution on the day-to-day of a particular project, especially in healthcare where, as you mentioned, from a stakeholder perspective, we could be dealing with infrastructure, application, physicians, nurses, patients, of course. So I'm curious about your perspective on leadership and the most effective leaders that you've seen in terms of their enablement of success of these projects?
Well, leaders can be very influential in the success of a project. Leaders sometimes by definition and the way that they have led in the past era has been through control and, telling teams and their support staff and the people that are responsible for the execution of these projects, when they want something done by, how they need to do it. And they are forcing a lot of constraints on teams that might be realistic, might not be realistic. And I think it's done with the greatest intent, but it doesn't necessarily bring the greatest results. Leaders today need to be more mentors, need to be coaches. They need to empower their teams, which means they got to not tell the team what to do, ask the team what to do. I call it in the book the push-pull theory. Don't force the team onto something. Ask the team, how long do you think this will take you to do? Let the team say 1 week. And now you've changed the whole dynamic of accountability and responsibility. Instead of the leader saying you only have 1 week to do it, when the team fails, they really are not, they didn't decide it was going to take 1 week. Someone told them it was going to take 1 week. But if they decide themselves that they can do this in 1 week, they've really now made more of a commitment, and now they become more accountable and responsible. I think leaders have to learn how to adapt and change to be able to get the most out of the teams and their resources that have available to them. And today, the best leaders in my mind are, they're called coaches, they're called mentors, they're called people that will provide guidance and allow the teams to be empowered to be successful.
Sounds like that requires a lot of trust that kind of goes both ways, that the sort of, do level folks need to really trust that leader and then kind of vice versa. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, very much so, and it takes time, and you got to evolve a maturity level. Tuckman defined it very, very well, where you said, "Let's start forming, then start, storming,
Right.
norming, and performing." But if you don't start this initiative and you don't start practicing it, you won't ever get to that level. It's the same as a coach of a football team or a basketball team. When you get all your new players coming in at the beginning of the year and they don't know each other and they don't know how to play together, you got to allow them to get that opportunity to learn what each other's skills are. And it takes time, yes, but yes, you're correct. You got to build that trust, and the sooner and the quicker you can do it, the more you're going to get the results you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, so a lot of healthcare organizations, not and outside of healthcare, but certainly in healthcare, I think our reliance on consultants seems to be, I'll say, sort of increasing. How do you help CIOs and their teams build the internal capabilities instead of relying on consultants long term? There can obviously be some wonderful opportunities for consultants to help, inject life into a healthcare organization. But in terms of that long term dependence, especially, how do you help teams build those capabilities to avoid that long term dependence?
Well, I think first organizations need to decide if they need consultants or not. And, this might not be in my best interest saying what I'm going to say. The first thought should be, can we do this in-house? I mean, it's going to save money. It's going to definitely allow their teams to evolve better. But sometimes they don't have the necessary skills to do something. And sometimes it's not required for them to have that skill. An outside consultant might have done something 10, 20 times, like move a data center. They might only move data centers once in the entire decade. So why hire people that have all of those skills when you don't need to practice this every month, every year? The people that you want to hire, you want them to be more operational. So there's a good example of, okay, now it is viable and it is worth my while bringing in a subject matter expert that's got the experience and done it before. Now the question you got is twofold. Are these individuals coming in as staff augmentation? So are you going to now manage them internally and they're just going to become part of your regular day-to-day activities? Or are they going to come in as an outsourced managed service provider and potentially do it for you? Or consultant, as you mentioned. They are going to be project driven. They're going to come in and then they're going to get out. So I think you've got to work through all of that in your decision making. And then, regardless of which one you choose, you want everything to be done within the framework of what you are building within your own governance and processes internally, so that whatever is achieved can be sustained, and you can be able to continue to practice a lot of the governance and methods that whoever comes in to assist and help is able to bring. And that means everything needs to be very transparent. So a long way to answer that question, but transparency from outside consultants to your internal staff and having them all work together. If you have the right consultants, that valuable information you can learn from it can allow you to become more self-sufficient as you progress and you mature as an organization.
And obviously, as you say, you've been in the consulting space for some time. And one of the things that I'm always fascinated about is kind of the balance between, you've obviously developed wonderful methodologies that are very transferable from kind of one project to the next. But then you also have organizations that could be quite different in terms of their culture, their organization, whatever the case may be. So how do you as a consultant leverage those best practices and those processes that you've developed in balance with an organization's particular needs, requirements, cultures, or other kind of variability?
Well, it's a hybrid, because agile in its truest form you can't practice. Right. Agile, doesn't have defined timelines. It works in a cadence of iterations, and you build through a backlog. But no provider has got an unlimited budget, so it all comes down to money again. So if you've got a fixed sum of money that you can afford on a project, it means you've got a fixed time that it's got to be done within, with a fixed number of resources. Well, you're predefining that before the project even starts, because usually when a hospital embarks on, I'm going to upgrade a new platform, or I'm going to bring in a new application, what can we afford? And there might be some due diligence done in validating that. But once that's decided, it's locked. Then the project starts. Well, now you just, you contradicted what I told you about 10 minutes ago, where now you're forcing a budget and a timeline on people versus having them, engage. So the sooner they can engage, the better. The sooner they can be part of that decision making of that budget, the more effective it can be. But that doesn't always happen that way. So you need a hybrid approach. There is the formal governance that you have to still accommodate, and then there's the execution of the team. So, I layer it up as that top down, top bottom. You still have to report top up in a very old-fashioned style, with budgets, timelines, risks.
The old triple constraints, right?
The old triple constraints. And then below that, with the teams, you can get a little bit more to that agile philosophy and manifesto of truly allowing empowerment and try to create different ways to get the highest levels of productivity. So it's a hybrid, it's a balance.
Absolutely. And obviously, the complexities in healthcare, as you mentioned, are fairly unique. The industry went through, just amazing, tremendous transition when the EMR, the EHR sort of came into a heavy focus, a couple of decades ago. And I feel like we're starting to see some of that again now through the lens of AI and some of these emerging technologies. So as you think about health systems that may be embarking on these large-scale projects, whether it's through AI or any other lens, frankly, what kind of advice would you give to a CIO or a C-level of executive that's embarking on a big project like that?
A little bit self-serving. So any project that you're going to do and execute on, good project management and governance can really help you be successful. It can, you are dealing with your three constraints, and how do you deliver and still provide what management and your executive office requires. And having a framework to do that in is so important. Otherwise, you're operating in the blind. So, some organizations have very formalized PMO officers that facilitate this. Sometimes you have to bring in outside support, and that is the role that I play many, many times. But without it, you put in a lot of these engagements at risk. So,
Right.
governance, process, and method really can go a long way in any of these project initiatives.
Do you see major differences between, I'll say, like if you're working with a Stanford Health, for example, versus maybe a smaller health system, maybe a rural health system? Are there differences in terms of the scale of the organization, either in terms of needs or complexity or anything else of note, if you're looking at sort of the broader landscape of healthcare and providers?
Very much so. I don't even think it's healthcare specific. Any
Right.
organization that's large builds in a lot of additional governance, which can be a lot of bureaucracy at times as well. And decision making gets delegated and it gets expanded. So there's lots more checks and balances. And yes, that's great. And it allows these larger organizations to exist, but can also make things very time consuming to get stuff done. And how do you find a way to facilitate and accommodate that in a bigger environment? Whereas a smaller shop doesn't have that governance. They don't
Right.
even have the resources to have the meeting to have that governance. Sometimes just one person is making all of those decisions. So you can do things a lot quicker and a lot faster, but that comes with risk. So it's trying to find that balance. But no, you need to adapt. And each organization is unique, not just in size, but just even in culture. Some, are more traditional, and some are more innovative, and some are willing to take a little more risk. And, you know, just also even the stability of their environment, what they've been able to build over the last decade. Some of these systems, you've got to be very cautious about how you engage in them or change them, because they might not be very stable, and that can add a lot more challenges to any type of new project. So there's everyone is different.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And one of the other fascinating kind of elements, obviously we've worked with consultants in the past. We have obviously folks on our staff who come from kind of the consulting world and all that good stuff. I'm wondering, how do you have a conversation with an executive when a project maybe isn't going as it was planned, and maybe we do need to kind of pivot in terms of our thought process, methodology, whatever the case may be? How do you sit down with an executive kind of across the table from you and have those difficult conversations when a project maybe is sliding off the rails?
My answer might not sound intuitive or not, but you don't ever want that to happen. If
Right.
that happens, you haven't been practicing the right governance and process.
Yeah.
So it's what's the job of a goalie in a soccer game? Everyone thinks it's to save the ball. Well, that's the last resort. That's
Right.
after their midfielders and their defense didn't get the job done, and now they have to save the ball. So if you practice governance and you practice the process, in the book it talks about reflection for projects, R, and reflections about constantly reevaluating your current state of where you are. And agile, practiced in the way that we practice it, is we like these 2-week or monthly iterations where
Right.
we go back and we reevaluate everything we do every 2 weeks. And when you start seeing things not going as well as you planned, the biggest risk is that you've gone wrong for maybe 2 weeks or two iterations, 1 month. So the damage isn't significant, and you can pivot and you can change. But if
Right.
you let that happen, not happen, and you're now 6 months down the road and you realize everything's not going the way you wanted, now you've just multiplied the potential ramifications and problem. And those are hard conversations. They're never easy. They don't have a good result, because somebody's going to be upset. Somebody's going to pay more money. Some project's going to be delayed, and the net result is it's a compromise. So because you've changed what your initial goals and objectives were. So my answer to that question is, you don't ever want to be in that situation.
I love that analogy. That makes perfect sense. That's the backstop, and there's a whole bunch of controls and processes and methodologies you can put in front of it to make sure you never get there. So I like that a lot. I appreciate that analogy for sure. We're just at about time here. So any final thoughts? Anything that you're working on that you're excited about that you'd like to share with the community? Any final thoughts at all?
No, I think, the buzzword, as we all know it, is AI right now. And,
Sure.
I think that's the what everybody is talking about, and how to best utilize these tools. And, it's a very powerful tool if used correctly. But I think that, again, to get the most out of it, we need to understand its value and what we're trying to do from a business perspective, and how do we measure the success of what we're looking at. So we're working on projects right now to streamline the patient access, patient scheduling. Once a patient is brought onto the system, and how do you make that more efficient? It's still done very much today in an old style, old fashioned. You have agents answering the phone. Digitally, there's a lot going on, but it hasn't evolved quite yet. And digitally, it's hard to do because you need everything else in line. So if you want someone to self-schedule an appointment, well, then you need to know the doctors and physicians' availability. You need to know when they're going to be at certain locations. So there's so much of that data that's required even before you can embark on optimizing that or automating that. But there are things you can do. So we're working on projects like that today, which are great. This will reduce errors. It will reduce the amount of no-shows. It will make sure that when the patient gets to the facility, you can reduce their cycle time, and slowly evolve with more the digital tools that are now available to people using, text messaging, voice recognition, and so forth. So that's one area. And then on the other, each area of the healthcare system, there's different items going on right now, just data management and data collection, especially for more the healthcare institutions that are doing a lot of research. How to get that data all bundled together in a way where you can use AI tools to start extracting that data. The challenge with doing that is there has to be a source of truth. And the data in a lot of these healthcare systems are replicated so many times, you erode that source of truth. So getting that data structured correctly so you can take advantage of AI tools. So there's so many initiatives, but AI is the ultimate goal. But to do that, we got to make sure, our foundation and our house is in order.
Well, as you evolve through that, because I think you're right. I think that is going to be both, a tremendous opportunity for the industry and also a tremendous amount of work to kind of get around the curve and get there. So I hope you'll come back and talk to us as we continue on the journey and update us on how it's going.
No, I'd love to. I've enjoyed the conversation. Great questions, and I think very relevant for the time we're in. And as I said, it's a great industry, and we always got challenges in this industry, which makes it exciting to be part of.
Absolutely. And before I let you go, I have to ask you, where can folks go to find out more about the work you're doing at T2 Tech Group?
Yeah, so our website is t2group.com, and we have all the different legal entities and businesses that we have there. You can even get a copy of the book. You can download it. You can go buy one from Amazon, but you can get it for nothing off our website as well. And there's a way to contact us if you need to. And I'm pretty active in engaging. So if any of your audience, wants to just talk or share thoughts and ideas, I'm totally available.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin. It was a real pleasure to have you on. I enjoyed the conversation.
I did as well. Thank you.
And thank you also to our listeners. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, share, and subscribe to help us keep growing the show. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Taylor Healthcare and the digital healthcare experience, you can go to taylor.com/digital-healthcare. That's our show for today. This is Chris Civitores wishing you health and good cheer. Take care.
To learn more about Taylor Healthcare, please visit taylor.com/digital-healthcare. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice or services. The Digital Healthcare Experience is produced by Naomi Schwimmer. Podcast music by Nicholas Bach.
Modern healthcare runs on data, but what do you do when your core systems go down? Introducing iMed Health from Taylor Healthcare. Digital tools that minimize risk with proactive solutions for downtime events. Go to imedhealth.com to learn more. Find the link in the show notes.